My husband left me for his boss's daughter, convinced he had traded me in for wealth and power. But at the grand gala months later, he froze when he realized the truth. I was the real heiress all along. Please stay with me as I tell my story. And don't forget to support our channel by subscribing, liking our videos, and sharing with your loved ones. Your support means the world to us. Imagine being abandoned by someone who thought you had nothing to offer, only to discover that your quiet humility had hidden more wealth than they could ever dream of reaching. Stick with me while I share my story of betrayal, hidden identity, and the moment when everything came full circle. And if this story touches your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share it with the people you care about. My name is Clara, and I was 27 when I learned that love built on assumptions crumbles faster than a house of cards. My husband Daniel was 29, charming and ambitious, always reaching for the next rung on the ladder of success. When we married, I thought his drive would build our future together. I had no idea it would become the weapon he used to destroy us. Daniel worked at Whitman Industries, one of the most prestigious firms in the city. His boss, Richard Whitman, was worth hundreds of millions, and his daughter Veronica was the kind of woman who treated wealth like a birthright. She was 25, beautiful, in an expensive way, and had never heard the word no in her entire life. For 2 years, our marriage seemed solid. We lived in a modest apartment, nothing fancy, but it was ours. I worked as a children's librarian, a job I loved, but that barely paid enough to cover our basic expenses. Daniel worked long hours, climbing the corporate ladder with determination that both impressed and worried me. I supported his ambitions because I thought they were building towards something we would share. Late nights at the office, weekend networking events, business dinners that stretched until midnight. I endured it all because I believed in us. I believed in the promises we had made to each other, but I should have paid closer attention to the way his eyes began to wander during company events. I should have noticed how he started comparing our simple life to the luxury surrounding him every day at work. Richard Whitman's world was intoxicating for someone like Daniel. Private jets, exclusive clubs, vacation homes in 3 different countries. Everything Daniel had dreamed of, but never experienced. And at the center of it all was Veronica, who had grown up swimming in that luxury like it was the air she breathed. She was everything I wasn't, glamorous where I was simple, demanding where I was accommodating, entitled where I was grateful. When she looked at Daniel, she saw potential. A handsome man who could be molded into the kind of partner her father would approve of. When she looked at me, she saw an obstacle. Veronica had a way of making her interest known without being obvious about it. Lingering touches during handshakes, private conversations about Daniel's potential, suggestions that he deserved so much more than his current situation. She was patient, strategic, and completely ruthless. Daniel began changing in ways I tried to ignore. He started criticizing our apartment, calling it cramped and embarrassing. He complained about my clothes, suggesting I didn't know how to dress for his work events. When I reminded him that my librarian salary couldn't cover designer outfits, he would sigh like my financial limitations were a personal failing. "Clara," he would say after particularly fancy company parties, "don't you want more than this? Don't you want to live differently?" I thought he meant working together toward better circumstances. I didn't realize he meant leaving me behind. To reach them. Veronica's influence grew stronger each week. She would invite Daniel to exclusive events, always with some business excuse. "Father wants to discuss the Peterson account," she would say, batting her eyelashes. "It would be so helpful if you could join us for dinner." These dinners never included wives. The man who used to hold my hand during movies began sitting on the opposite end of our small couch. The husband who used to ask about my day stopped listening when I answered. Conversations became functional. Bills to pay, schedules to coordinate, nothing more. I tried everything to reconnect with him. I planned romantic dinners with our limited budget. I suggested weekend trips to places we could afford. I asked about his work, his dreams, his feelings. But Daniel was already gone, even while his body still came home every night. The worst part was the gaslighting. When I expressed concern about our growing distance, he would tell me I was imagining things. "You're being paranoid, Clara. I'm working hard for our future." But I could see the future he was working toward, and it didn't include me. The end came on a rainy Thursday evening in November. Daniel walked through our door with an expression I had never seen before: determined, cold, and strangely relieved. He didn't even take off his coat before he started talking. "Clara, I need to be honest with you. I've been thinking about our marriage, about what I want from life, and I've realized something important." His voice was steady, rehearsed, like he had practiced this speech in his car before coming upstairs. My heart sank before he even finished. "I've fallen in love with someone else. Someone who can give me the life I've always wanted. Veronica and we're going to be together." The words hit me like a physical blow, not just because he was leaving, but because of how little remorse he showed. He spoke about destroying our marriage like he was discussing a career change. "You have to understand," Daniel continued, pacing our small living room like he was giving a presentation. "Veronica can offer me opportunities you never could. Her family has connections, resources, a world I could never access through my own work alone." He talked about me like I was a business decision that hadn't worked out. "You're a good person, Clara, but good isn't enough anymore. I need someone who can match my ambitions, who can help me build the kind of success I've always dreamed of." The coldness in his voice was worse than anger would have been. Anger would have meant he still felt something. This calculated dismissal meant I had become nothing to him, less important than his career prospects and social climbing dreams. "I've already moved my things out," he said, gesturing toward our bedroom. "Veronica is helping me find a new place. Something more appropriate for the life we're building together." After Daniel left, I sat in our empty apartment feeling smaller than I ever had in my life. The silence was deafening. Our wedding photos still hung on the walls, mocking me with memories of promises that had meant nothing to him. I took a leave of absence from the library, telling my supervisor I needed time to process my divorce. The word felt strange in my mouth. Divorce. I had never imagined that word would apply to my life. For weeks, I barely left the apartment. I ordered groceries, online, avoided social media, and let myself disappear into the grief. Weren't enough to keep the person who promised to love you forever? What Daniel never knew was that my simple lifestyle was a choice, not a necessity. My father, Thomas Reynolds, had been one of the most successful real estate moguls on the East Coast. When he passed away 2 years into my marriage, he left me an inheritance that would have shocked Daniel into silence. But I had kept it secret, even from my husband. I wanted to live authentically, to know that any love I received was genuine rather than motivated by money. My father had raised me to value character over cash, kindness over connections. I worked at the library because I loved it, not because I needed the paycheck. The inheritance sat untouched in trust accounts, managed by my father's lawyers while I lived the life I chose. Daniel fell in love with who I was when he thought I had nothing. His leaving me for Veronica's money proved he had never truly known me at all. 3 months after Daniel left, I finally called my father's lawyer, Mr. Harrison. "I think it's time," I told him over the phone. "I'm ready to step into my inheritance." His voice was warm, understanding. He had been waiting for this call, knowing that eventually I would need the strength my father had left me. Within a week, I was sitting in a boardroom learning about properties I owned, investments that had grown exponentially, and business opportunities that stretched across multiple states. The numbers were staggering, over $80 million in assets, and that was just the beginning. I wasn't just wealthy, I was powerful. Companies that Daniel's firm worked with were actually subsidiaries of my father's empire. The world Daniel was so desperate to enter was one I had been born into and chosen to leave behind. I moved into my father's estate, a sprawling property that had sat empty since his death. Walking through rooms filled with beautiful art and memories, I felt him with me, encouraging me to embrace who I really was. For the first time since Daniel left, I felt strong instead of broken. I began taking an active role in my father's businesses, working with executives who had known me since childhood, but respected my decision to live independently. They welcomed me back with open arms, eager to have a Reynolds leading the company. Again. My wardrobe changed from practical librarian clothes to the sophisticated elegance my position required. I hired a personal stylist, not to impress anyone, but to honor the legacy I was now representing. The woman in the mirror looked confident, powerful, ready to take on the world that had always been hers. Meanwhile, Daniel's fairy tale with Veronica was turning into a nightmare. What he had mistaken for love was actually boredom on her part. Veronica had a history of collecting men like trophies, enjoying the chase but losing interest once the conquest was complete. Daniel found himself in a world where he was always the outsider, always trying to prove he belonged. Veronica's friends treated him like an amusing pet, something temporary that would be replaced when she grew tired of him. Mr. Whitman barely tolerated him, seeing him as a fortune hunter who had seduced his daughter. The pressure was crushing. Daniel worked longer hours, trying to prove his worth, but nothing he did seemed to satisfy the Whitmans. He was living in a gilded cage, dependent on Veronica's whims and her father's approval. The independence he had once shared with me was gone, replaced by constant anxiety about maintaining his precarious position. The annual children's education charity gala was the social event of the season, attended by everyone who was anyone in our city's elite circles. What Daniel and Veronica didn't know was that the gala was sponsored by the Reynolds Foundation, my family's charitable organization that I had quietly begun directing. I received the invitation as the foundation's new chairwoman, a position I had accepted to honor my father's commitment to education. It felt fitting. My love for books and learning, cultivated during my years as a librarian, now backed by the resources to make a real difference. I chose my dress carefully, not to make a statement, but to feel confident. It was midnight blue silk, elegant but not ostentatious. My jewelry was simple but precious, pieces that had belonged to my grandmother. I looked exactly like what I was: old money, real class, understated power. Walking into the ballroom that night felt like stepping into my destiny. Conversations stopped as I entered. People who knew my father approached with warm smiles and fond memories. Business leaders who had worked with Reynolds Industries for decades welcomed me like the prodigal daughter returning home. And then, I saw them across the room. Daniel stood frozen, his champagne glass halfway to his lips, staring at me like he was seeing a mirage. Veronica followed his gaze, her confidence cracking as she took in the scene. Me, surrounded by respect and recognition, clearly belonging in a world she thought she owned. The moment when understanding dawned on Daniel's face was worth every tear I had shed. His mouth opened slightly, his face pale as he finally grasped the magnitude of his mistake. He had left a queen to chase after a princess, and now the truth was undeniable. When I was introduced as the evening's keynote speaker, representing the Reynolds Foundation, the entire room applauded. I walked to the podium with grace, looking out at faces filled with respect and admiration. In the crowd, I could see Daniel and Veronica, their shock evident even from a distance. "Good evening," I began, my voice clear and confident. My father, Thomas Reynolds, believed that true wealth comes from lifting others up, not putting them down. Tonight, we continue his legacy by investing in the dreams of children who, like him, believe that education can change everything. My speech was about hope, resilience, and the power of believing in yourself even when others don't believe in you. Every word was genuine, born from my own experience of being underestimated and cast aside. But I knew Daniel was hearing a different message, the sound of everything he had thrown away. After my speech, as I mingled with guests who congratulated me and shared stories about my father, Daniel appeared at my elbow. His face was stricken, his usual confidence completely shattered. "Clara," he whispered urgently, "we need to talk." "Please." Veronica stood a few feet away, her earlier arrogance replaced by uncertainty. She kept glancing between Daniel and me, finally understanding that she wasn't the wealthiest woman in the room after all. "There's nothing to discuss, Daniel," I said calmly, continuing to smile at the guests around us. "You made your choice very clear 6 months ago." My voice carried no anger, no bitterness, just the quiet confidence of someone who had found her place in the world. "But I didn't know," he said desperately. "You never told me about your family, about any of this. If I had known—" His words trailed off as he realized how terrible they sounded. He was essentially admitting that he would have stayed if he had known about my money. "Daniel," I said, turning to face him fully for the first time that evening. "That's exactly why I never told you. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for what I could provide. You failed that test completely." His eyes filled with regret, but it was too late for remorse. "Clara, please. I made a terrible mistake. I was confused, ambitious, stupid. But I love you. I've always loved you." The words sounded hollow, desperate, nothing like the confident man who had walked out of our apartment. "No, Daniel. You loved the idea of me when you thought I was all you could get. Then you loved the idea of Veronica when you thought she was better. But you've never actually loved anyone but yourself. The truth hung between us, undeniable and final." Veronica appeared beside him, her mask of superiority completely gone. She looked at me with something approaching fear, realizing that her entire worldview had been turned upside down in a single evening. Other guests began to notice the tension. Whispers spread through the crowd as people recognized Daniel and remembered the gossip about our divorce. Some knew about his relationship with Veronica, and now they were watching the drama unfold in real time. "Isn't that Clara Reynolds' ex-husband?" I heard someone murmur behind us. "The one who left her. For the Whitman girl? How embarrassing for him now." The social circle that Daniel had been so eager to join was now witnessing his humiliation. Richard Whitman himself approached our group, his face stern as he took in the scene. He had heard the whispers too, and his businessman's mind was quickly calculating the implications. His daughter was dating a man who had abandoned significant wealth for the illusion of climbing higher. "Daniel," Mr. Whitman said coldly, "I think it would be best if you and Veronica left early tonight. This is neither the time nor the place for personal drama." The dismissal was public, cutting, and absolute. Daniel's position in the Whitman world crumbled in that moment. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice or make a scene. I simply smiled politely and returned to my conversations with people who respected me for who I truly was. The contrast was stark. While Daniel and Veronica slunk toward the exit in shame, I remained surrounded by warmth and genuine connection. As they reached the ballroom doors, Daniel turned back one last time. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and I saw in his face the full weight of what he had lost. Not just the money, though that was staggering. He had lost someone who had loved him genuinely, who had chosen simplicity over luxury to build something real with him. That look would haunt him forever, and somehow, that felt like justice enough. Within weeks of the gala, Daniel's life fell apart completely. Mr. Whitman, embarrassed by the public spectacle and disgusted by Daniel's gold-digging behavior, fired him immediately. The prestigious position Daniel had worked years to achieve vanished overnight. Veronica, faced with her father's disappointment and the social embarrassment of being associated with Daniel's obvious opportunism, ended their relationship without ceremony. She moved on to her next conquest, leaving Daniel with nothing but the memory of wealth he had briefly touched but never truly possessed. Daniel tried to find work at other firms, but word travels fast in corporate circles. The story of how he had left his wife for his boss's daughter, only to discover he had abandoned true wealth for fake promises, became cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms across the city. He ended up taking a job far below his previous level, his confidence shattered, and his reputation destroyed. The ambition that had driven him to leave me became the very thing that ensured he would never reach the heights he had dreamed of. I threw myself into my work with the foundation, finding purpose in using my inheritance to create real change. We built libraries in underserved communities, funded scholarship programs, and created literacy initiatives that reached thousands of children. The money my father left me became a force for good, just as he had always intended. My personal life bloomed as well. Free from Daniel's constant dissatisfaction and Veronica's subtle cruelty, I rediscovered joy in simple pleasures. I traveled when I wanted to, not because I needed to impress anyone, but because I wanted to see the world through my own eyes. I met people who valued kindness over wealth, substance over status. For the first time in my adult life, I was surrounded by genuine relationships built on mutual respect rather than need or obligation. The loneliness I had felt in my marriage was replaced by meaningful connections with people who saw my true worth. A year later, I encountered Daniel at a coffee shop near my old neighborhood. He looked tired, older, worn down by the consequences of his choices. When he saw me, his face lit up with a hope that made me feel sad rather than satisfied. "Clara," he said, approaching my table hesitantly, "you look incredible. I've been thinking about you, about us. I know I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but seeing you now, maybe we could try again? Maybe we could start fresh?" I looked at this man who had once been my whole world, feeling nothing but gentle pity. "Daniel," I said softly, "I hope you find happiness. I truly do, but it won't be with me. That chapter of my life is closed." He tried to argue, to explain, to promise he had changed, but I simply gathered my things and stood to leave. "Take care of yourself," I said, meaning it sincerely. As I walked away, I felt lighter with each step. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. Daniel's betrayal freed me from a marriage built on false foundations. It forced me to reclaim the identity I had hidden, to step into the power and purpose my father had prepared me for. I learned that hiding who you are to test someone's love is a dangerous game. But I also learned that when someone fails that test, it reveals something important about their character that no amount of wealth or status can change. The woman Daniel left behind was small, accommodating, willing to accept crumbs of affection. The woman I became was someone who knew her worth and refused to settle for anything less than genuine love and respect. My father always said that money doesn't change people, it reveals them. Daniel's pursuit of wealth revealed his true character, and my inheritance revealed mine. I chose to use it as he had taught me, not as a weapon, but as a tool for building something beautiful in the world. And that, I think, is the difference between old money and new money, between class and cash, between love and opportunism. Some lessons can't be bought, only lived.